Lesson 8 for August 17 through to 23, The Least of These, read by Dr. Percy Harold. Monday, August 19, Overcoming Evil with Good. When we consider the teaching of Jesus, it is worthwhile to keep in mind the people he was talking to and the circumstances in which they lived. Jesus had begun to attract large crowds of people from the regions where he had ministered, as we'll see in Matthew chapter 4, verse 25. Great multitudes followed him from Galilee and from Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and beyond the Jordan, and the following verse in chapter 5, verse 1, And seeing the multitudes, he went up on a mountain, and when he was seated, his disciples came to him. Most were common people, living under the imperial rule of the Roman Empire, but some were the Jewish rulers and religious leaders. The existence of the common people was difficult. They had few choices for their own lives, burdened by heavy taxation and weighed down by religious tradition. In teaching these people, Jesus was obviously concerned with offering them a way to live well, to live with dignity and courage, whatever their circumstances. One example of this is found in Matthew 5, verses 38 to 48, which we'll see later. In the English language, these instructions, turn the other cheek, give them the shirt off your back, and go the extra mile, are so well known as to be clichés. But this familiarity belies the radical actions and attitudes that Jesus is teaching here. The scenarios Jesus described were common experiences for many of his listeners. They were often violently assaulted by their superiors or masters. They were often indebted and lost their property to the landlords and lenders. They were often pressed into labour by the accompanying Roman soldiers. Jesus taught the people to respond with integrity, to treat the oppressor better than they deserved, and, by so doing, to resist the loss of their humanity. While these oppressors tried to exert their power, the people always had the freedom to choose how they would respond, and, by resisting non-violently and responding generously, they exposed the evil of the oppression and injustice that was being done. Question. Compare Matthew 5, verse 38 to 48, with Romans 12, verses 20 to 21. How are we to live out these radical principles in our lives? Matthew 5, beginning at verse 38. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you not to resist an evil person. But whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbour and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends the rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet your brethren only, what do you do more than others? Do not even the tax collectors do so? Therefore you shall be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. And Romans chapter 12, beginning at verse 20. Therefore, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him drink, for in so doing you will heap coals of fire on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. To finish today's lesson, Jesus summarized all the law and the prophets, all of the sacred writings we often describe as the Old Testament, in a simple principle that has come to be known as the Golden Rule. Matthew 7:12, so in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. In what ways right now can you make an effort to do what he commands us here, regardless of the cost? You have been listening to a reading of the Adult Sabbath School Bible Study Guide by Dr. Percy Harold from Queensland, Australia. This service is brought to you by Hope Channel, the Sabbath School Department, and Christian Services for the Blind. Remember, God is always faithful.